Satnam. This is Satpurik coming to you Friday afternoon for the Dharma talk. I posted a quote from James Baldwin about making the world that we live in and how do we remake it. So karma is a very complex topic, and we're not going to really try to cover everything that there is to know about karma because I don't know everything there is to know. But I am going to talk to you about change. Last week's talk was about hope and hopelessness. And I started this series because I wanted to share what it means to me to have changed and what it means to have engaged in a Dharma that allowed me to change. So it kind of all started from there. In my 20s, I had struggled with clinical depression for several years. And what I wanted to share is that the most pivotal thing I learned in that process was that to feel differently, I had to act differently. And when you're in that state of powerlessness and hopelessness, it's very challenging to make those incremental changes. The lethargy and the inertia of the fatigue and the depression can be almost beyond the imagination to change. And so what I want to share is that little by little, I learned to not identify with the depression. And this is a big part of karma and dharma, is we tell a story, we believe it, and we act from it. And the greatest thing that you can do to live outside of karma, outside of time and space, is to stop believing your own story and to begin writing a new story. And the way that I was able to do that was little by little, I began to notice the gap. What do I mean by the gap? I mean that when I first started working with myself and my depression, I began saying, I'm depressed. And it was all the time, I'm depressed. When the reality was there were moments on any given day that I felt okay, that I felt neutral, or I didn't feel devastated, right? So maybe that was the difference. But when I started minding that gap between my story, I'm depressed, and what was actually in the moment real, when I began to mind that gap and pay attention to it and recognize it, give it a name, oh, I'm not depressed in this moment. And when I began to quit using the language, I'm depressed, and instead started saying, I have moments of depression, then those gaps between those heavy moments grew larger and larger and larger to the point that I'm no longer living with clinical depression. Now, it's true even today that if there's something that I want to change, karma works really, really purely and clearly. Whatever I do today makes tomorrow better. And Yogi Bhajan always said that women should have a tomorrow. We should have a hope of the future. And so in large part, karma is this relationship to time and space and understanding that I don't need to have belief or faith or hope in anything outside of myself. What I need to understand is that there's a direct relationship between my actions today and my experience tomorrow. And if you go into that space and you really tune into the frequency of I can change how I feel by changing how I act today, it opens up an enormous amount of personal power. Now, it takes what it takes to get there. So my most recent example is I'm trying a 40-day vegan diet. I am not a dieter. I do not like dieting, as you can tell. But I do have a profound and deep, long engagement with my own recovery from addictive behaviors. So I went to the studio and I'm working on my new album, and all of that is very wonderful and creative, and I was having a stressful day. So I was eating one of my stress foods. And my engineer and friend who helps me with my projects looks at me with complete neutrality and says, "Oh yeah, that's a drug." And for whatever reason, on that given day, I was able to hear it and I was able to act on it. I wanted to feel differently. I wanted to understand that there was a way to feel different tomorrow if I acted and behaved differently today. So this is a very small example, and I can tell you that I tried this diet 7 years ago, and I haven't tried it since. So it takes what it takes to get there, and we can't, I call it the tyranny of self-help, right? There's so much information out there for us. There's so much that we can know and intellectually understand. But the reality is that until we're ready, until there's a readiness, until the karma flowers, the Dharma has nowhere to go. Now, we'll talk more next week about what it means to move into Dharma and what does that particular way of life look like. But I just thought I'd talk to you a little bit about material karma. What can we actually do on any given day to feel better tomorrow? And in my experience, minding the gap, minding that break between our story, what we believe about ourselves, and what actually is, that present awareness, is one of the pivotal keys to making those changes you want to make in your life. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Sat Nam.